Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk on building components in Sitecore 10 using the ASP.NET Rendering SDK. I'm Adam Seabridge and I'm a freelance developer and consultant based in the UK. I've worked with Sitecore for about 8 years now and have been an MVP for the last 3 years. Today we're going to discuss the .NET Core Rendering SDK and what it does, and I'm going to provide a quick overview of the Getting Started template. We'll then dive into a demo of building a component in Sitecore 10, and I've got a few tips to share at the end. There should hopefully be some time for questions as well. JSS introduced the layout service which separated layout and rendering to provide Sitecore content as JSON. This allows rendering of Sitecore pages outside of Sitecore in a JSS app using SDKs for front-end frameworks such as React and Angular. The new ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK in Sitecore 10 is a new SDK that uses the same services to render content in the rendering host using .NET Core. The ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK provides features such as the client API to call the layout service, placeholder rendering and field helpers to render fields, mapping HTTP requests to layout service requests, and binding response to strongly typed models, and experience editor and analytics support. This diagram was provided by Nick Besselman from Sitecore, so thanks for this, Nick. And it explains the HTTP request pipeline to give you an idea of how things work. So the user's HTTP request resolves a controller and an action, and then the rendering engine middleware runs before the controller actions are invoked, and that these make a request to the layout service to return a response. The response is then returned to the rendering host HTTP context, and the controller action is invoked, which then renders the view. The root placeholders are then rendered using the tag helpers, and models are then bound to views, and tag helpers in those views are used to render the fields from the model. The final response is then returned back to the user. I'm going to be using a slightly modified version of the Getting Started template for this demo. The Getting Started template is a sample environment provided by Sitecore to try out Sitecore development with ASP.NET and Sitecore containers. You don't need to use Docker to use the ASP.NET Rendering SDK, but using the Getting Started template will save you a lot of time if you want to experiment with this. It contains a Docker environment for Sitecore XP single topology with an ASP.NET rendering host, serialized items for a one-page sample site, and also a Visual Studio solution with a platform project for the CM and rendering host. It doesn't follow Helix principles as it's designed to keep things simple, but Helix examples are available from the link above on doc.sitecore.com. There are some prerequisites you need, so .NET Core 3.1, .NET Framework 4.8, Visual Studio 2019, and Docker for Windows with containers enabled, and then PowerShell 5.1. So once you've got the prerequisites installed, the next step is to follow the link in the documentation there for the Getting Started template. And there's 3 core steps here. The first step is actually to download and install the template. Then you need to stop IIS. You can't run IIS at the same time as the Getting Started template as it uses some of the same ports. Then run the command to create my project solution, and then finally follow the steps to set up the container environment using the init and up PowerShell files that come with the Getting Started template. I've included a link at the bottom there to a setup video by Robert Hock, as it's really useful video and it will get you up and running quickly, so I'm not going to go into this in any more detail. So let's jump into the demo and actually build a component in Sitecore 10. So I've followed all these steps for using the Getting Started template, and I've got it all installed and ready. So I can show you everything that's installed locally now that I've got this up and running. I've got the actual project set up in my C projects folder, and so this is the whole of the Getting Started template, and that includes Docker files and the Visual Studio project files, all of the config, and then the PowerShell files to get this all set up and running. I've also already stopped IIS, so I ran IIS reset stop to stop IIS. I then did Docker compose op to get the containers all up and running, and prior to that I started Docker desktop. So this needs to be running before you can do Docker compose up, and you can see all my containers are running here, and you can see some of these would be using ports that IIS would be using, which is why you need to stop IIS. So now I've got that up and running, I can show you the Sitecore instances. So this is the actual content management instance, so that runs on CM, my project local host by default with the Getting Started template, and this is Sitecore 10 instance. And then we have the actual rendering host, which runs on my project local host. So this is the .NET Core website that is rendering the content from the layout service. So this isn't what a default Sitecore, what a default Getting Started template looks like when you install it. It looks like a kind of default Sitecore instance with the logo and the banner that you get on the home page. So this is a slightly customized version with Bootstrap 4, my own CSS and some components to make it a bit more interesting. And we're going to build a new component, a card component, that is going to sit between this hero and these contents components here. So the first step for this is probably just showing you Visual Studio quickly in the Visual Studio project. So as part of the when I pulled the projects down to get the Getting Started template set up, it pulls down the solution file with these two projects. You've got the platform project and you've got the rendering host project. So the platform project contains configuration for the content management instance, and the rendering host project is what gets deployed to the rendering host instance, and this contains my models and views, and then one of the core files in here is the startup project file. So this contains core configuration for the layout service, the rendering engine, routing, etc. And any changes made in this project are automatically deployed to the rendering host with .NET Watch on save. And then if you build from the platform project, it will deploy to the content management instance. So we're going to build a model bound view, and that's the example we're going to follow today with a data source within Sitecore. So we'll come back to Visual Studio shortly, and we'll see in a bit more detail how some of these files work. So to start with, we're going to go into Sitecore, and we're going to open Content Editor, and the first step is to create a template. So this is done exactly in the same way you would for Sitecore MVC. We have a My Project folder already set up in here, and there's a few test components that I've created already in here. So we need to create ourselves a new template in here, and we're going to call our template card. It doesn't matter what our data, data field section is called, so we can call that whatever. We'll just call that card data for now. And then we're going to add 3 fields in here, so we're keeping this quite simple. We have a title field, which is a single line text field. We have a text field, and we're going to make that a multi-line text field. And we're going to set that one to a general link. Okay. So we've now got our template, and the next step is to create ourselves a rendering. Before we do that though, we can set a icon. So I'm using a little browser plugin for Sitecore called Sitecore Icon Search, which is really useful for doing this. You've not used that before. So then we're going to go up and create ourselves a rendering. So this is where things start to get a bit different. And the important thing is to use JSON rendering, this new type here, when we create our view. So we're going to call this card as well. And the component name is important because we need to make sure that we call our model the same thing, the same name. So in our data source location, we're going to set that to the root, and then also we're going to add our card template in here. That we just created. And again, we'll set ourselves an icon. Okay, so now we can move on to adding, updating our placeholder settings. So I already created a my project container placeholder earlier on. So we want to add our new rendering to that, because this is the placeholder we're going to use, and I'll show you where this is included on the layout in the Visual Studio project later. So we're going to add our new card rendering as an allow control, just like you would in Sitecore MVC. And then something that you don't normally need to do, certainly not in Sitecore MVC anyway, is on the actual layout of the page. So our up here, I haven't shown this yet, but the home item is using this main layout here, and this has a special field on it called the layout service placeholders, and in order for our placeholders to be returned by the layout service, we need to make sure it's included. So you can see I've already got some included here. I'm going to add my new placeholder, so that now means the layout service should be able to return that. So we now need to create some content under our home item. So we need to actually add ourselves an instance of our card component. And we need to populate our fields. So now I'll just link that back to itself, back to the home page. Okay, so we've got some content, we've got a template, we've got some content based on that template, and we've got a rendering, and we've also done our placeholder configuration. So we should now, if we go up to our home item, we should be able to publish the site. So if we do a smart publish on it, that should publish all our updates. And when we come over here and refresh it, the home page, we don't see our changes yet. We haven't added our card onto this home page yet. So if we go to the home page now and open it in Experience Editor, we should find that our placeholder is available. So this is my project container placeholder, and we can add the card that we just created as our demo card, and save that. Okay, and what you're getting here is a message telling us that it's an unknown component. You can't really read that very well, and that's because we haven't done what we need to do in Visual Studio to tell our rendering host what to do to render that out. We haven't bound our model in our view. But what we can do is we can see that is coming back from the layout service. So if we go over here, we can run a command to see if that is actually working or not. So Docker Compose logs are rendering will effectively give us some debugging, and we can see what's coming back from the layout service in the response. So you can see all our different placeholders here. So if we go back into Sitecore and make sure we publish, smart publish our site. So the next step is to go into Visual Studio and actually create ourselves a model and a view. So we'll start with a model. So the model, there's a model folder by default already set up in here, and there's some examples that I've created. So I'm going to call on model card model, and we now need to define our fields to match what the fields were called in Sitecore on our template. So you see we're using the layout service model fields interface here. We're not using Glass Mapper or anything here, so that's something to get used to. It's a bit different Sitecore MVC again. So I've basically got a text field here, which is what's used for single line text field or multi-line text. So our title and text are going to use that same layout service type, field type. And then for our link field, we're going to use the hyperlink field type. So we've got our 3 fields defined in our model that match our types in Sitecore. And then in our views, your views need to, your component views need to be created within this Sitecore component folder. And that's a convention-based thing, so they need to live in here. So we can add ourselves a new view, and we're going to call that card. And for this, we are going to follow because we're using Bootstrap and we're going to create a card component from Bootstrap, this is the kind of markup that it uses. So we're going to follow that kind of structure for our card. So I'm going to paste in basic structure. And then what we need to do is actually now bind these to our model using tag helpers. So there's kind of two different approaches to doing that. You can use the ASP4 tag helper and then bind that to the particular field. So in this case, title. So I'm going to do the same thing for text. For the text field as well. And then for our link field, we can do something slightly different. So can you use the SC link tag helper, and that is closed in the same way. And again, I need to bind that to my property of link, and I'm also going to set that to editable as well, so that it supports editing in Experience Editor, because that isn't disabled by default. And then we also need to set our model as well. So we need to define our model as the card model that we created earlier. And then the final step to wire everything up is that in our startup class that I mentioned earlier, we need to actually tell the rendering engine what our model and our view are called, so that it can bind them to the layout service correctly. So we need to do, you can see some examples in here already of model bound views. So we just put in our model name, and then we put in our view name that we just created. So pretty simple. So I'm going to build that. And .NET Watch should deploy those changes for us to the rendering host. And if we look in the index, default index, you should see that our placeholder, my project container placeholder, is already in here, and that's using the SC placeholder tag helper. And there's some other placeholders in here that are already there as well, that we're already using. So this is the placeholder that we've just made available to the layout service, and that we put our card in. So if we go back into our browser, in Experience Editor, and refresh our page, you can see that it is rendering our card out, and it's fully editable in Experience Editor, just like any other component, and it's in that placeholder that we the my project container placeholder. And if we go over to our publish page, refresh it, our component displays. So I think I haven't set some text, or it's not rendering the text out on the link for some reason, but it is displaying our card correctly. Okay, so that's how you create a component in Sitecore 10. And we should have seen that our layout service response in here will have updated. So you've got the my project container placeholder with our card in it. So that's showing that's coming back. That's the layout service response. So if we switch back to my slides, there's a few tips that I've got for you. So make sure if you have any issues, you check the Docker console, and you can run the Docker compose logs rendering command so that you can see any issues that come back. If you are having any issues with the rendering host or the CM not updating, then you can use Docker compose restart rendering CM. So the reason you want to restart both of them, when you restart just the rendering on its own, if you want to use the CM with Experience Edit, it can cause some issues because Docker can assign it a new IP address. So the best bet is to restart the rendering and CM together in one go. Also read up on the tag helpers, because that's really useful. And take a look at the Helix examples. I'll say this, the getting started template is not following Helix conventions, so take a look at the other examples that do. And the last thing is make sure that you are using version 14.1 or version 15.1 of the Sitecore ASP.NET DLLs and layout service client DLLs, because there was an issue with Experience Editor in the earlier versions, I think in 14.0 and 15.0. So you need to make sure you update those. Thank you very much. If you want to get in touch, you can reach me on Twitter or on Sitecore Slack, or if you want to go old school, you can reach out to me on email instead. Thank you very much.